They say that time is the great healer. They say that if you give it enough days, enough months, and enough years, eventually the wounds will close up and the scars will fade. But for Arthur Coldwell, time wasn't a healer. Time was the thief. It was a silent, patient burglar that had slowly stripped away everything he had ever loved. It stole the strength from his back. It stole the steadiness from his hands. It stole the love of his life, leaving him with nothing but silence. And today, time had come to steal the very last thing he had left. As he stood behind the peeling paint of his front door, watching the sleek black luxury car pull up to the curb, Arthur felt a coldness in his chest that had nothing to do with the winter draft. He watched a woman step out of the vehicle. She was dressed in a suit that likely cost more than his entire house was worth. She walked with power. She walked with authority. He thought she was the executioner. He thought she was the final blow from a world that had decided he no longer mattered. He thought she had come to throw him out onto the frozen street to die. He was ready to give up. He was ready to stop fighting. But that woman didn't have an eviction notice in her hand. She was holding something else, something small, something made of old, dark wood. She didn't have a lawyer with her. She had a memory from a blizzard 29 years ago that Arthur thought the world had buried under the snow. She looked him in the eye, tears streaming down her face, and said the words that shattered the ice around his heart. "I'm the girl you saved 29 years ago." This is the story of the Millionaire Revealed. Stick around and settle in, because you are about to witness how one single act of kindness in the middle of a storm in 1995 traveled through time to save a man who had absolutely nothing left to lose. The house made sounds when it was dying. Arthur Caldwell sat at his small laminate kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a mug of cold water, just listening. He knew every groan this house made. He knew the high-pitched whine of the floorboards in the hallway, the deep rattle of the window frames when the wind picked up, and the settling creak of the roof beams. Lately, the sounds had changed. They weren't just the sounds of an old house settling. They were the sounds of a structure giving up. It was like the wood knew that Arthur couldn't protect it anymore. Arthur looked down at his hands. They were large hands, the hands of a man who had built things for 30 years. But now the knuckles were swollen to twice their normal size, twisted like the roots of an old oak tree that had been poisoned. The skin was mapped with white scars, memories of slips with chisels, hammers that missed the mark, and rough lumber that bit back. He shifted his weight in the hard wooden chair, and a sharp, white-hot spasm of pain shot up his lower back, seizing his breath for a moment. He closed his eyes and waited for it to pass. It was a cruel reminder, a daily souvenir from the scaffolding collapse 5 years ago. He had been a foreman then, a leader, a man who commanded respect on the job site. One loose clamp, one sudden drop, and Arthur Caldwell, the man who could outwork anyone half his age, became Arthur Caldwell, the liability. The settlement money had seemed like a lot at the time, but after the lawyers took their cut and the 2 first surgeries were paid for, it evaporated like rain on hot asphalt. He opened his eyes and looked at the table. Resting in the center, ominous and bright against the dull gray of the room, was a red envelope. It was stamped in bold, aggressive black ink, "Final Notice." Arthur didn't open it. There was no point. He knew the contents by heart without even looking. He knew exactly what the number at the bottom of the page was, down to the cent. He knew the legal threats, the bolded dates, the robotic language telling him that his time was up. The electricity had been cut yesterday morning. The gas company had come and shut off the valve just 3 hours ago. The bank was coming for the rest of it, the bricks, the mortar, the land, in exactly 30 days. He took a sip of the water. It was freezing cold, hurting his teeth. He looked at the empty chair across the table. It was pushed in neatly, the way Mary always liked it. The silence in the kitchen was heavy, pressing against his ears. "I'm glad you aren't here to see this, Mary," he thought, the words echoing in the empty chambers of his mind. "You deserved a palace. You deserved warmth. You deserved a husband who could keep the lights on. You didn't deserve a man who couldn't even boil water for a cup of tea." Mary. Just thinking her name brought a dull ache to his chest that was far worse than his back injury. She hadn't died of anything dramatic. It wasn't a sudden car crash or a long, heroic battle with a visible enemy. It was a simple viral infection that settled in her heart 2 years ago. It was the kind of thing that rich people fixed with a few visits to a specialist in the city. But they didn't have the money for specialists. They had the local clinic, and they had hope. But hope doesn't cure heart failure. If they had possessed the insurance, if he had still been working, she might be sitting in that chair right now, complaining about the draft and knitting him a scarf. But she wasn't. She was gone. And that guilt, the guilt of survival, the guilt of poverty, weighed heavier on Arthur than the collapsing roof over his head. He stood up, grabbing his cane, and hissed through his teeth as his spine protested the movement. He needed food. His stomach was twisting into knots, a hollow, gnawing sensation that made him feel lightheaded. He walked to the refrigerator, pulling the door open out of habit, even though the light bulb inside didn't turn on. The shelves were bare, a half-empty jar of mustard, a wilted head of lettuce that had turned brown at the edges, a container of milk that had surely gone sour in the warming fridge. Pride is a funny, dangerous thing. It keeps you standing when you should fall. It keeps your chin up when you walk down the street. But when you are alone, in the dark, pride tastes like ash in your mouth. It stops you from asking for help until it is far too late. Arthur walked to the bedroom. The air in here was even colder, the chill seeping through the single-pane glass. He walked to the tall dresser, the one he and Mary had bought at an estate sale 20 years ago and refinished together. He opened the top drawer. Beneath his socks, wrapped in a soft gray cloth, was a small velvet box. He took it out. His hands trembled as he opened the lid. Inside lay a pocket watch. It wasn't gold, it was solid silver, heavy and cool to the touch. The face was slightly yellowed with age, but the hands still moved with a smooth, rhythmic tick-tick-tick. It had belonged to his grandfather, a man who had laid railroad ties in the 1920s. It was supposed to be a family heirloom. It was supposed to be passed down to a son and then a grandson, but Arthur and Mary never had children. The line ended with him. He ran his thumb over the smooth metal casing. This was it, the last thing of value he owned, the last tether to his history. He snapped the box shut, shoved it into his pocket, and walked to the front door. He put on his thin wool coat, buttoning it all the way to his chin, and grabbed his flat cap. He took a deep breath, steeling himself against the humiliation of what he had to do, and stepped out onto the porch. The wind hit him like a physical blow. It was a bitter Ohio winter wind, the kind that finds every gap in your clothing and bites the skin. Arthur locked the door, though there wasn't much left inside to steal, and began the long, slow limp toward the main avenue. As he walked, Arthur looked around his neighborhood. Oakbridge used to be a community. He remembered when every house on this street was full of families. He remembered block parties in the summer, the smell of barbecue smoke, the sound of Motown playing from open windows. Now it was a graveyard of memories. On the left side of the street, the houses were like his, rotting, paint peeling, porches sagging under the weight of neglect. But on the right side, that was a different story. On the right side, the skyline was being eaten alive by glass and steel. Gleaming skyscrapers were rising into the gray sky, casting long, expensive shadows over the poor homes below. Cranes swung overhead like giant mechanical vultures picking at the bones of the neighborhood. They called it revitalization. They put up signs with smiling faces that said, "Building a better future." But Arthur knew what it really was. It was erasure. They were wiping people like him off the map, one block at a time.
The taxes were rising, the rents were skyrocketing, the grocery stores were being replaced by high-end cafes where a coffee cost more than Arthur's hourly disability wage. He passed the local park, a place he had actually helped build 20 years ago when his back was strong and his crew was the best in the city. He remembered pouring the concrete for the walkways. He remembered installing the heavy oak benches. He saw a young father pushing his son on a swing, laughing as the boy kicked his legs toward the sky. Arthur stopped for a moment, leaning on his cane, watching them. The sound of that laughter was so pure, so unburdened. A pang of loneliness struck him so hard it almost brought him to his knees right there on the sidewalk. He had built the world for other people to live in, and now the world had decided it had no use for him. He was a relic, a tool that was broken and ready to be discarded. If you've ever felt like the world is moving too fast and leaving good people behind, tap that like button right now. Let's show Arthur that he isn't invisible. He continued walking, his leg dragging slightly, until he reached the shop with the iron bars on the windows. A faded sign creaked above the door, Oakbridge Pawn and Loan. He pushed the door open, the bell chiming a harsh announcement of his arrival. The air smelled of dust and desperation. The shelves were lined with the debris of broken dreams, guitars that wouldn't be played, tools that wouldn't be used, wedding rings from marriages that failed.
Sam, the owner, looked up from behind the thick glass counter. He was a man Arthur had known for 10 years. "Afternoon, Artie," Sam said, not looking up from his ledger. "Cold one out there." "It's winter, Sam," Arthur replied, his voice raspy and dry. "It's supposed to be cold." Arthur approached the counter. He felt small. He felt like a beggar. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the velvet box. He placed it on the glass. "I need a loan, Sam." Sam stopped writing. He looked at the box, then looked up at Arthur's face. He saw the hollow cheeks, the frayed collar of the coat, the desperation in the eyes. Sam sighed, a heavy, tired sound. "Artie, you know how it is. The market is dead." "Just look at it," Arthur said. Sam opened the box. The silver watch gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights. "It's from 1920, Arthur said, his voice gaining a little strength. "Solid silver, hand-wound, it works perfectly. My grandfather carried this on the railroad." Sam picked it up, weighing it in his hand. He turned it over. He didn't look impressed. He looked bored. "Nobody buys pocket watches anymore, Artie. The kids, they all have phones. This is just metal. It's a paperweight." Arthur felt a lump form in his throat. "It's not a paperweight. It's history." "History doesn't pay the rent," Sam said coldly. He put the watch back in the box and slid it across the glass. "I can give you $40. $40? Arthur felt the blood drain from his face. He felt dizzy. 40? Sam, come on, the silver alone is worth more than that. I need to buy groceries, the electric bill." $40, Sam repeated. "Take it or leave it. I've got overheads. I'm running a business, not a charity ward." A charity ward? The word stung like a slap. Arthur wanted to yell. He wanted to snatch the watch back, tell Sam to go to hell, and storm out with his dignity intact. He wanted to keep his grandfather's legacy. But then his stomach growled, a loud, painful, embarrassing growl. Hunger doesn't care about dignity. Hunger doesn't care about legacies. Hunger only cares about right now. Arthur stared at the watch one last time. He was selling his history to buy bread. "I'll take it," Arthur whispered, his voice breaking. He walked out of the shop minutes later with two $20 bills in his pocket. He felt lighter, but not in a good way. He felt empty. He felt like he had left a piece of his soul on that glass counter. He stopped at the corner store and bought the basics: a loaf of cheap white bread, a jar of peanut butter, a jug of water, a can of soup. He counted the change carefully, putting every penny back into his pocket. When he got back to his house, the temperature inside had dropped even further. The sun was setting, taking whatever meager warmth it offered with it.
Arthur sat in his armchair in the living room, wrapped in a blanket, eating a slice of dry bread with peanut butter. It stuck to the roof of his mouth. It tasted like defeat. Woo! The wind howled outside, a long, mournful shriek that rattled the loose window pane in its frame. That sound. Arthur stopped chewing. He froze. It wasn't just wind. It was the specific scream of a blizzard. It was the sound of nature turning violent. As Arthur sat there, freezing in the dark, that sound triggered something deep in his brain. It pulled him out of his broken 50-year-old body. It pulled him away from the pain in his back and the grief in his heart. It transported him back in time, back 29 years, back to when he was 21 years old, back when he was strong.
The year was 1995. The location was Pine Creek, a rugged, mountainous area miles away from the city. Arthur was just a kid then. He was working odd jobs, logging, carpentry, whatever paid cash. He was saving up for trade school. He was living in a small A-frame cabin near the timberline, surrounded by miles of dense forest. He remembered that version of himself. He remembered waking up without pain. He remembered swinging an axe for hours without getting tired. He thought he was invincible. That night, the blizzard of the century had hit. The radio weathermen had missed it completely. They had predicted light flurries. They were wrong. Within 2 hours, the snow wasn't falling. It was driving sideways, a white wall of ice. The drifts were waist deep. The temperature plummeted to 20 below zero. It was the kind of cold that freezes your breath in your throat before you can even exhale. Arthur remembered being inside the cabin. He was stoking the wood stove, trying to keep the fire roaring against the draft. Then he heard it. Thump, thump, and then a sound that made his blood run cold. Whimper. He had frozen, holding a piece of wood firewood. He thought it was a wounded animal. A deer, maybe, or a coyote looking for shelter. But a deer doesn't sound scared. Arthur grabbed his heavy flashlight and pushed the door open. The wind slammed into him, trying to knock him down. He stepped out into the waist-deep snow, the ice stinging his face like needles. "Hello?" he shouted, but the wind swallowed his voice. He swept the beam of the flashlight back and forth across the white void. Nothing but snow. Snow and trees. He was about to turn back, convinced his mind was playing tricks on him, when the light caught something. A patch of color, bright pink and neon yellow. It was unnatural. It didn't belong in the savage white world. Arthur waded toward it, fighting the drifts. He dropped to his knees and started digging. He dug with his bare hands, the snow freezing his fingers instantly. He brushed away the powder and gasped. It was a child. A little girl. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old. She was curled into a tight fetal ball, half buried in the drift against the side of his woodshed. She was wearing a puffy pink coat, but one of her boots was missing. Her skin was blue, waxy. Her eyes were squeezed shut. She wasn't moving. Panic, cold and sharp, seized Arthur's heart. He didn't think. He didn't assess. He reacted with pure instinct. He scooped her up. She felt terrifyingly light, like a hollow bird bone, and he turned and sprinted back to the cabin. He kicked the door shut and laid her on the rug in front of the fire. The next 8 hours were a war between Arthur and death. He stripped the frozen, wet clothes off her tiny body. He wrapped her in his own sleeping bag. He wrapped her in every quilt he owned. He remembered sitting there, rubbing her tiny frozen hands between his large, rough palms. He rubbed until his own skin burned, trying to transfer his life heat into her. "Come on," he whispered, over and over. "Come on, little one. You hold on. You don't let go." He made warm sugar water and used a spoon to drip it past her purple lips, drop by drop. Around 3 a.m. she gasped, a ragged, wet intake of air. Her eyes fluttered open. They were dark, terrified, and confused. "Mama?" she croaked. She started to cry, but she was too weak to really sob. It was just a low, heartbreaking keen. She was terrified.
She was in a strange place, with a strange man, and her parents were gone.
Arthur didn't know what to do. The phone lines were down. The roads were impassable. He couldn't get help. He had to keep her calm. He had to keep her awake. He looked around the cabin. He saw a piece of scrap pine wood by the fire. He picked up his pocket knife. "Hey," he said gently, his voice rumbling in his chest. "Don't cry. Look here." He started to carve. The knife sliced through the soft wood. "You like animals?" he asked her. "I like wolves. Wolves are survivors. They're brave." The little girl watched him, mesmerized by the movement of his hands. For a moment she forgot the cold. Arthur carved a small, crude wolf. He smoothed the edges with his thumb. He handed it to her. "Here," he said. "This is a guardian. As long as you hold this, you're brave too. Nothing can hurt you." She gripped the wooden wolf in her tiny fist and closed her eyes. She fell asleep holding it. The memory faded. The howling wind outside the house in Oakbridge brought Arthur back to the present. He was sitting in his armchair, shivering. He rubbed his scarred hands. They ached. He hadn't thought about that night in years. He hadn't thought about that little girl. Why now? Maybe because he felt just as cold now as she looked then. Maybe because he was wondering if anyone was coming to save him from the snow. Boom, boom, boom. A heavy knock rattled the front door. Arthur jumped, his heart hammering against his ribs. He grimaced as the sudden movement sent a spike of pain through his back. He checked the clock on the wall, the one that still worked. 4 p.m. It was too late for the mailman. It was too early for the sheriff to come serve the final eviction papers. Who comes knocking in weather like this? Arthur grabbed his cane. He pushed himself upright, his joints popping. He walked to the window and peeked through the slats of the broken blinds. His breath caught in his throat. A sleek black luxury SUV was parked at his curb. The engine was running, the exhaust puffing white clouds into the air. It looked like a spaceship that had landed in a junkyard. Standing on his porch was a large man in a dark suit holding a massive umbrella. Underneath the umbrella stood a woman. Arthur's stomach dropped. The developers. It had to be. They couldn't wait 30 days. They wanted him out now. They were probably here to offer him $1,000 to vacate immediately so they could bulldoze his home and put up a parking lot for their glass towers. Anger flared in his chest. It was a hot, righteous anger. "Fine," he muttered. "Let them look me in the eye when they do it." He walked to the door. He unlocked it and pulled it open. The cold air rushed in, swirling around his ankles, but Arthur didn't shiver. He stood tall. He leaned on his cane not for support, but for balance. He channeled every ounce of dignity he had left. "If you're here to offer me a settlement to leave early," Arthur said, his voice firm and loud, "save your breath. I know my rights. I'm staying until the 30 days are up. You can bulldoze it then." The woman looked up. Arthur paused. She wasn't looking at him with disdain. She wasn't looking at him like he was an inconvenience. She was stunning. She was a black woman in her mid-30s, radiating elegance. She was dressed in a navy wool coat that was tailored perfectly to her frame. Her hair was pulled back in a tight professional bun. She looked like she owned the city. But her face wasn't hard like the business sharks Arthur expected. Her eyes were red. They were swimming with emotion. Her lips were trembling. "Mr. Arthur Caldwell?" she asked. Her voice was steady, but there was a crack in it, like a fissure in a dam holding back a flood. "That's me," Arthur said, confused by her reaction. "I'm not here to evict you," she said softly. She looked past him, into the dark, cold hallway of his home. May I please come in?" Arthur hesitated. Shame washed over him, a deep, burning shame. He was ashamed of the cold house. He was ashamed of the peeling wallpaper. He was ashamed of the smell of poverty, that musty, stale scent of a house that hasn't been loved in a long time. He didn't want this rich woman to see how he lived. "It's freezing in here, ma'am,"
No heat, no lights. "I don't mind the cold," she whispered. "Please." There was something in her voice, a plea, a desperation, that made Arthur step aside. The woman signaled to her bodyguard. "Stay here," she said. She walked into the living room. Her expensive heels clicked on the bare wood floor. She looked around. She took in the destitution. She saw the outlines on the walls where pictures used to hang before Arthur sold the frames. She saw the empty table. But she didn't curl her lip. She didn't look at the mold on the ceiling. She walked straight to the fireplace mantel. There were only 3 things left on that mantel. It was the only shrine Arthur had kept. A framed photo of Mary smiling on their wedding day. His old, worn-out hammer, the handle stained with sweat, and a small, rough-carved wooden bear. Arthur watched him, gripping his cane. "I'm packing," he said defensively. "It takes time when you have a bad back. I'll be out." The woman ignored him. She reached out and picked up the wooden bear. Her manicured thumb traced to the curve of its ear. She held it like it was made of fragile glass. "You still carve," she said. It wasn't a question. It sounded like a revelation, like a prayer. "Keeps the mind busy," Arthur muttered. "Hands don't work well enough for the detail anymore, but I whittle." "Look, lady, who are you? You from the bank? Why do you care about a wooden bear?" The woman turned around to face him. Tears were now silently streaming down her cheeks, ruining her perfect makeup. Why would a millionaire be crying over a cheap wooden bear in a freezing shack? The answer is about to blow you away. If you're enjoying this story so far, make sure you've subscribed to True Black Tales so you don't miss powerful moments like this. She didn't speak. Instead, she reached into her luxury handbag. She pulled out a small velvet pouch. It looked old. The fabric was worn at the edges, the drawstring frayed. "I've carried this with me every day for 29 years, she said. Her hands were shaking. She opened the pouch and tipped the object into her palm. It was a small wooden wolf. It was stained dark with age. It was polished smooth from being held and rubbed thousands of times. But the style was unmistakable. The rough cuts, the shape of the ears, the posture of the animal. It was the twin of the bear on the mantel. Arthur felt the floor tilt beneath his feet. The room spun. He gripped the back of his armchair to keep from falling. That's pine wood," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "From the ridge." "You carved it with a pocket knife," she said, her voice cracking. "You sat by a fire while a storm raged outside. You gave it to a terrified little girl who thought she would never see her parents again. You told her, 'Hold on to the wolf. Wolves are brave. As long as you hold this, you're brave too.'" Arthur stared at her. He looked into her eyes. And suddenly the years stripped away. The expensive coat vanished. The height vanished. He saw the terrified eyes of the child from 1995, the blue lips, the tiny hand gripping his finger. "The girl in the snow," he breathed. "I'm Julianne. I'm the girl you saved." Arthur sank into his chair. His legs gave out. I never knew your name," Arthur stammered. "The paramedics took you in the morning. The police took my statement. It was chaos. By the time I asked about you, you were gone." "My parents were in the hospital for months," Julianne explained, taking a step closer, heedless of the dust on the floor. "They had broken bones, internal injuries. It was a miracle they survived the crash. By the time we were well enough to come back to Pine Creek to thank you, your cabin was gone. They told us it burned down." "Electrical fire," Arthur nodded slowly, the old pain surfacing. "Lost everything. My tools, my truck. Had to move to the city to find work. I started over from zero."
"I looked for you, Arthur," she said earnestly. "I looked for you for years. I hired private investigators. But Arthur Caldwell is a common name. And you're a ghost. You have no social media, no LinkedIn, no digital footprint." Arthur looked down at his worn-out shoes. I'm just a man trying to survive, Miss Julianne. Not much to put online when you're just trying to keep the lights on." Julianne wiped her face, composing herself. The businesswoman returned, but the softness remained in her eyes. "I own Thorne Development," she said. "The company building the medical center downtown. The company buying this block." The realization hit Arthur like a physical punch. The warmth he had just felt evaporated. "So you are the one evicting me," he said, his voice flat. "You're the one tearing down my house." "No!" Julianne looked horrified. "No, Arthur, God, no!" She rushed to the table where the red envelope sat. She picked it up. She ripped it in half. Then she ripped it in quarters. She threw the pieces on the floor like confetti. "I was reviewing the land acquisition files 3 days ago," she said, speaking rapidly. "I saw the name on the list of evictions, Arthur Caldwell. I checked the date of birth. I checked the background, former residence, Pine Creek. I stopped the meeting immediately. I yelled at my staff. I told them nobody touches this house." She reached into her bag again and pulled out a thick blue folder. She placed it on the table. "I didn't come here to kick you out, Arthur. I came here to balance the ledger." "What is that?" he asked, looking at the folder. "It's the deed to this house," she said. "I went to the bank this morning. I bought the mortgage, every cent. It's paid off. It's yours, free and clear, forever." She opened the folder. "I also ran a credit check. I found the liens, the medical bills from the local hospital, from Mary." Arthur's eyes widened. He started to shake his head, backing away. "Miss Julianne, Mary's bills, that's over $50,000. The house, that's tens of thousands more. I can't accept that. That's charity. I'm a proud man." "Is it charity?" Julianne asked, her voice fierce and intense. She slammed her hand on the table. "Arthur, look at me. You gave me 29 years of life. You gave my parents their daughter back. Do you know what that is worth? There is no number high enough. It is priceless." Arthur looked at her. He saw the fierce determination in her face. "I just did what anyone would do," he whispered. "No," she corrected him. "You did what a good man would do. You stayed awake for 8 hours, keeping me warm when you were exhausted. You starved yourself that night to give me your rations. You saved me." She reached out and took his rough, scarred hands in her soft ones. She didn't flinch at the calluses or the deformities. "But I'm not just paying your bills," she said. "I looked at your employment history. Foreman, master carpenter, 30 years of experience." Arthur tried to pull his hands away. "Look at me," he said, his voice thick with shame. "I'm broken, Julianne. I can't haul lumber. I can't climb ladders. My back is gone. I'm useless." "I don't need you to haul lumber," Julianne said firmly. "I have 20-year-olds for that. They have strong backs, but they don't have this." She tapped his temple. "They don't have your mind. They don't have your eye." She took a deep breath. "I'm building a park in the center of the new complex, a sanctuary. I want it filled with handcrafted woodwork, benches, gazebos, art. I need a site manager, Arthur. I need someone to teach the young men how to carve. I need someone to show them the soul of the wood."
Arthur looked at her. "A site manager?" "I have a guest cottage on my estate," she continued. "It's about 20 minutes from here. It's warm, it has no stairs, and it has a workshop attached to it. Fully heated, state-of-the-art tools, laser guides, hydraulic lifts. You won't have to lift anything heavier than a pencil. I need you, Arthur. I can't trust this project to anyone else." Arthur looked at the torn red envelope on the floor. Then he looked at the wooden wolf in Julianne's hand. He saw the little girl in her eyes. He saw the life she had lived because he had been there that night. He saw the potential for a future where he wasn't just an old, broken man waiting to die in the cold. He realized he wasn't being erased. The good he had done had rippled out, silently, invisibly through the years, and now the wave had returned to lift him up.
"Why?" he asked, his voice cracking, tears finally spilling over his own cheeks. "Because you didn't leave me in the cold," Julianne said, squeezing his hands, "and I refuse to leave you there." Arthur looked around the empty, freezing room one last time. He realized that the winter of his life didn't have to be the end. He took a deep breath, and for the first time in years, the air didn't hurt his lungs. It felt like hope. "I'll need to pack my tools," he said. Julianne smiled. It was a smile that lit up the gloomy room like a sunrise. "My driver is already bringing boxes." Arthur thought his useful days were over, but his kindness planted a seed 29 years ago that just bloomed into a forest. Type "kindness returns" in the comments if you believe that good deeds always find their way back to you. An hour later, Arthur walked out of the front door of the crumbling house for the last time. He was wearing his coat, but he wasn't cold. He carried his grandfather's pocket watch. Julianne had insisted they stop at the pawn shop on the way out to buy it back, no matter the cost. He stood on the porch and looked at the street. The sun was beginning to break through the heavy gray clouds. A single beam of light hit the pavement, right where the luxury car was waiting. He didn't look back at the peeling paint. He didn't look back at the memories of pain. He climbed into the car beside the woman he had saved a lifetime ago. As they pulled away from the curb, leaving the gray neighborhood behind and heading toward the bright skyline, Arthur realized something. We never know when we are planting a miracle. It might be a smile to a stranger. It might be giving your last dollar to someone in need. Or it might be a wooden wolf carved by firelight in a blizzard. So be kind. Always be kind. Because the person you save today might just be the angel who comes back to save you tomorrow.